Hello lovelies, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to talk about 15 ways to live like it's 1920 in 2020. So I thought this was a fun video because we're already in a new decade. It's going to be the 20s, it already is, and 2020 is coming to an end, and I was kind of curious to do a little research and see what life was like back in the 1920s, what people ate, what type of cosmetics did they use, movies that were popular, music, fashion, and I just thought it'd be fun to go take a step back in time and see what it was like in the 1920s. And keep in mind, this is all kind of tongue-in-cheek and just for fun. It's kind of like a mini history lesson combined with a little bit of fashion and beauty. So let's jump right in and talk about the 1920s. So the 1920s was a decade of change when many Americans owned cars, radios, and telephones for the first time. The cars brought the need for good roads. The radio brought the world closer to home. The telephone connected family and friends. Prosperity was on the rise in cities and towns, and social change flavored the air. A substantial growth of industry occurred in North Carolina, especially in the areas of tobacco, textiles, and furniture. Some rural farmers were leaving their farms in order to receive a regular paycheck in the factories. Unions were on the rise. Women shortened or bobbed their hair, flappers danced and wore short fancy dresses, and men shaved off their beards. In the 1920s, the world was changing. People were bolder and had much more of a rebellious attitude compared to previous decades. The fashion had completely changed, especially for females. Any bit of being Victorian looking or modest went out the window. Organized crime was at an all-time high, fueled by Prohibition. There were bootleggers, flappers, and this cool new music called jazz. Most people began to discover the city life and less lived in rural areas and farms. The economy was booming. There were shiny new cars on the road, money to be made, and lots of brand new inventions. In 1920, the average lifespan in the United States was about 54 years, whereas today the average is about 77 years. In 1920, the average time a student spent in school each year was 75 days, and today it's about 180 days. In 1920, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed, creating the era of Prohibition. The amendment forbade the manufacture, sale, or transportation of alcoholic beverages. Many people ignored the ban, however. In 1933, the amendment was abolished, and it became the only constitutional amendment to be repealed. Also in 1920, on August 18th, the 19th Amendment was passed, giving women the right to vote. And on November 2nd, 1920, the first commercially licensed radio broadcast was heard. So as you can see, the 1920s were a very interesting decade with so much change and progress. So let's dive into a few tips to live like it's 1920. So the first tip is listen to jazz music. The 20s were often called the Jazz Age because the popularization of jazz music had an enormous cultural effect. Jazz music was important because it influenced fashion, dances, accepted moral standards, youth culture, and race relations. Louis Armstrong was an American trumpeter, composer, vocalist, and actor who was among the most influential figures in jazz. His career spanned 5 decades from the 1920s to the 1960s and different eras in the history of jazz. And tip number 2 is drink cocktails from a teacup. The cocktails were typically prepared in teapots and drunk from teacups, so in the event of a speakeasy being raided, everything appeared to be all above board. And tip number 3 is eat O. Henry chocolate bars. So O. Henry chocolate bars, I did not know this, was created in 1920. The candy bar owes its name to Williamson Candy Co. of Chicago, where it was created. They had an employee named Henry. The young man was popular with the ladies, and during his visits they would say, "Oh Henry, will you do this for me?" as a way to keep him around a bit longer. When it came time to name the new candy, a salesman hanging around the store remarked, "All we ever hear around here is Oh Henry." So that's what they call the new candy bar. And tip number 4 is eat flapjacks for breakfast. So these are considered a classic staple breakfast item nowadays, but these tasty treats were a huge hit in the 1920s. A change from cold delicacies to start the day earlier in the 1900s. Folks loved to feast on flapjacks in the morning to warm their bellies for a long day ahead. And tip number 5 is eat Jell-O. So I didn't know this either, how old Jell-O actually was, but Jell-O was introduced in 1897 and became a pantry staple, and by the 1920s was termed America's most favorite dessert. So even way back in the 1920s, they were making really interesting Jello molds and recipes, and you can find lots of unique advertisements from the 1920s showcasing this. And tip number 6 is drink gin Ricky. The gin Ricky was a popular drink during the Prohibition times, most likely due to its simplicity. And it consists of gin, lime juice, and soda water. And this was a popular drink and was even mentioned in The Great Gatsby by Scott F. Fitzgerald. And he said, "First you take a drink, then the drink takes a drink, and then the drink takes you." And the cocktail makes an appearance in chapter 7 of The Great Gatsby. Tom Buchanan mixes 4 of them. And tip number 7 is watch silent films. The 1920s saw a vast expansion of Hollywood filmmaking and worldwide film attendance. Throughout the decade, film production increasingly focused on the feature film rather than the short or two-reeler. In Hollywood, numerous small studios were taken over and made part of larger studios, creating the studio system that would run American public filmmaking until the 1960s. And the most popular movies from the 1920s were The Big Parade, 1925, and this grossed $6,400,000, and Ben-Hur in 1925, which grossed $5,500,000. And tip number 8 is wear Chanel number 5. Chanel number 5 was the first perfume launched by Gabrielle Coco Chanel in 1921. Scent formula for the fragrance was compounded by French-Russian chemist and perfumer Ernest Bew. The design of the bottle has been an important part of the product's allure. And Chanel number 5 is just another classic perfume. It's transcended time, and it's still even popular today 100 years later. And tip number 9 is wear the perfume Shalimar. This is another classic 1920s perfume. I prefer Shalimar in many ways because it's more exotic, and it's not as popular as Chanel number 5. And a lot of flappers used to wear Shalimar in the 1920s, and when you smell it after you spray it on your arm, it really takes you back in time. When I smell it, I smell kind of tobacco, I smell smoke, kind of smell vanilla, and just kind of an alcoholic beverage. It's hard to explain, but you feel like you're in a speakeasy when you smell Shalimar. I don't know, it's a really unique fragrance, and it was launched in 1925 in the International Exposition of Modern Industrial and Decorative Arts, and it's a Gare Lane perfume. And tip number 10 is use Pond's cold cream. So Pond's cold cream has been around for a very long time and was initially discovered in 1846, and the product was named the Golden Treasure and later called Pond's Extract because they discovered witch hazel, which was used to heal small cuts and other little wounds. In 1914, the company was incorporated under the name Pond's Extract Company. By 1922, the sales of Pond's had gone down, as many believed that such an easily available product could not perform as well as other designer products. Because of this, the Pond's company then targeted royalty, politicians, and people of high-class stature to become advertisers for the company. In addition, these ads were printed in magazines such as Vogue, and to give customers a feeling that they were really getting a quality product for a fair price. And tip number 11 is wear a short bob hairstyle. So by 1924, most women were taking the plunge and chopping off their locks. Frizzy curls and waves on the side of the face were a preference in the early 1920s, followed by smoother, sculpted waves in the mid-20s. Messy, frizzy, and large was the bohemian look the earlier flappers embraced. When women started to bob their hair, they couldn't go to the neighborhood salon. They didn't even exist yet in the 1920s. Bobbing was done at home in the hands of a trustworthy friend or an obliging men's barber. Barbers had to quickly learn to cut women's hair, following all the latest styles the movies were showing. By the end of the 1920s, the women's only salon industry exploded. Keeping short hair neat and curly was too much for a woman to do at home. And tip number 12 is wear a cloche hat. The cloche hat, meaning belle in French, was the hat of the 1920s. It was seen as early as 1908, but was popularized in the 1920s by the French designer Caroline Roubaud. And if you've watched Downton Abbey, you can see Lady Mary and lots of characters in the show wearing a cloche hat. It's a really unique kind of bell-shaped hat that really defined the 1920s. And tip number 13 is get a moon manicure. So the moon manicure was very popular in the 1920s and 1930s. And nail lacquer began to take off in the 1920s when French makeup artist Michel Menard partnered with Charles Revson company Revlon, as we know it today. The moon manicure was in vogue. Women kept their nails long and painted only the middle of each nail, leaving the crescent tip unpolished. And tip number 14 is wear Tangie cosmetics. Since the 1920s, Tangie lipstick has been bringing out the natural beauty of women everywhere. That's because it goes on clear, then gradually changes color to best accentuate your skin tone. Gone are the days of picking the wrong shade, as it automatically transforms into the best shade for you. The same is true for Tangie blush. It too changes color for a look that's natural and never artificial or made up. And you can still buy these products at the Vermont Country Store. I have the Tangie blush and the Moon Changing lipstick, and they're both very nice. And I even have some vintage Tangie cosmetics I got on eBay from the 1920s, and it's always interesting to look back at the packaging and to see what it looked like back in the 1920s. And tip number 15 is wear small beaded purses. So in the 1920s, dainty little beaded flapper bags and purses were highly decorated to match the beautiful flapper dresses of the era. They were too small to carry more than makeup compacts, a few dollars, and cigarettes. They were more of a fashion accessory than a practical handbag, and you can get replicas or even find authentic ones online, and they're really fun vintage piece to collect. And I always love the 1920s handbags and fashion. So it was really interesting taking a trip back in time and kind of just looking back to see what people ate back then, and kind of even what type of beauty was popular in terms of makeup and hairstyles. So I really enjoyed researching this video, and I can't wait to do other decades, so let me know which decade you want me to do next. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know which decade you want me to do next in the comments below. Alright, I'll see you guys again soon. Bye!